It is one thing to read about it online, to read about it in a catalog. It is a totally different experience to pick it up in real life and handle the cold steel Chinese war sword. Dude, this thing is impressive. This thing is sobering in its capabilities. Very sobering. Imagine that you are one of 45,000 troops during the Ming Dynasty, and this is your issued weapon, or one like it. Maybe a Chinese Dadao, maybe a little bit smaller, maybe a little bit larger, but you have a Chinese war sword. The companies ahead of you are carrying these huge pikes going into battle, and then come the companies of men, you by the way, with the Chinese war swords, and then behind them are the longbowmen. Each has its advantages and capabilities, and all will work in unison to achieve the battlefield objectives. Can you imagine that? How brutal, how frightening that would be to be on the other side of a company armed with Chinese war swords. Can you imagine this coming at you? 1,000 guys charging your line with these blades? I can't imagine. It blows my mind. Combat of the age in the Renaissance era, the Dark Ages, and during the dynasties in China. Whew, dude, if you ever have a chance, go to the Fitzwilliams Museum. I may have said this before in previous years. It is in Cambridge, England, and it has an amazing collection of real unearthed historical swords, mostly from Europe. I spent a whole day there one time. Whole day. I was infatuated with everything I saw. All sorts and descriptions. Some are in better condition than others because they've been unearthed. A lot of them are extremely rusty, but you get the feel of combat back in the Dark Ages. It was brutal. It was bloody. It was awful. I was deployed as a aircraft commander in the awesome KC-135 in the late 90s at Mildenhall Air Base then. There's a squadron coin from my squadron back then. 97th ARS. Had a day off and I took my mountain bike and bicycled from Mildenhall all the way down to Cambridge to visit that museum. Yep, spent a whole day there. Dude, amazing. I saw swords actually more like this one in their display cases. This is also a cold steel product. Their interpretation of the Gross Messer or big knife sword. This thing is impressive. I may review it separately. God, this thing is massive. 4 pounds, 1055, tempered spring steel. About $180 is what I paid for it in the day. Each one of these blades, by the way, is from my own collection. I am a sword collector. I find them fascinating and unique and cool. And again, sobering. Yeah, I like that word. Sobering means that you realize how combat used to be conducted. And you're going, oh my gosh, I can't imagine. That's what I was saying in the Fitzwilliams Museum as I was going through that. I was like, oh my, I can't believe guys faced off of this. How did you even survive that? How did you come out of a sword conflict with thousands of men armed with sharp implements with cutting capabilities like this and you managed to survive? I don't know. I think it was mostly luck. At the top I have 2 katanas for contrast to these 2 swords. This one is a Chinese 28-inch SGC, also known as a specialized Goza cutter. This is a broad katana, a larger, heavier katana at 3 pounds 7 ounces. I think I've reviewed it. 9260 spring steel. It cost me about $300 in the day. Chinese. This, like all the swords on the table, is a combat-capable sword. Now, that's a fake Hammond line there. But it is differentially, well, actually, this one is not differentially tempered. I might be wrong on that one. I get some of my swords confused sometimes. But it's spring steel, 9260. It's tough and it's sharp. Sharp. This one is a very affordable $80 Musashi Shirakawa, 2 pounds 9 ounces, 1060 steel. It was catalog number SS798 Bravo Kilo 99, in case you're wondering. Once upon a time, you could buy these in Amazon. I think I bought this in Amazon. $80? Look at the execution of this blade, this katana. Cotton wrapped handle, tight, no wiggling, no looseness. Serious spring steel blade. Not a replica. See, I don't really have an interest in having a collection of like non-sharpened swords. I think some guys do. I basically think of them as letter openers. I like that they're sharp. I like that they're dangerous. I like dangerous things. I manage them well. Dangerous things are awesome. Now in this video, focusing of course on the cold steel interpretation of the Chinese war sword, I'm not going to go into a ton of history about it because I'm not the expert. I will broad stroke it though, and it is fascinating. I will thank my friend Ray for sending me to Ben Judkin's essay on the Chinese Dadao, the Chinese war sword. I'll put a link below. It was dated November 2012. He did a great job investigating its history. Yeah, talks a little bit about its use during the Ming Dynasty, but mostly focuses on the Chinese war sword in the hands of occupational troops in the early 1900s, which I found fascinating. Had no idea. Even in the 1920s and 1930s, there were Chinese troops armed with the Chinese Dadao, which of course even by then was considered an obsolete weapon. Why did they carry it? Well, from what I said at the intro, its impressiveness. I mean, an occupational force rolling into a Chinese village armed with a Chinese war sword, you know, like 100 troops, for instance, the civilians tended to comply with their directives. You can imagine why. And throughout its history, if we're going to be honest, it was used as an execution tool a lot. The Chinese war sword, the Chinese Dadao. There are some, well, you can imagine, accurate period photographs of it being used accordingly. I often think if that was its true and primary calling and design focus to be used in that regard. I don't know. I think its broadness, its weight, its penetration capabilities with its sharp clip tip, I think it's also, for the period, an anti-armor weapon. The leather armor, the heavy clothing, the linen armor, I think, worn by the Chinese troops of the era, I think it would go right through it. Take off an arm and a leg, no problems. If you don't believe me, check out Cold Steel's demonstration video on the Chinese war sword, and you'll see him working over a pig carcass. Dude, it's sobering. There's that word again. It just, you can't believe its cleaving capabilities. When I do a knife review, I talk about how a broader blade will cleave quicker. It will shear quicker. That's the Chinese war sword by Cold Steel. It's very broad. It looks like a huge clip blade, actually, from a knife. Look how sharp that tip is, by the way. I've had this one for 10 years, incidentally. Yep, it is in 1060 spring steel. I should say 1060 carbon steel. Highly polished, incidentally. Great finish on this version of the Cold Steel Chinese war sword. Wicked edge on it too. I mean, I have my gloves on, I'm not going to take them off, but it will cut you if you're not careful. It's not like a razor edge that we would see from some of the blades, but I'm impressed with it. The overall length of the blade is 23 1/4 inches in this version. The handle is 14.5 inches long, and man, do I love the handle. It is obviously a two-handed weapon for someone adequately in shape, adequately strong to wield it. Which again, I wonder how the Chinese troops of the era, even in the 20s and 30s, did it. Weren't they smaller statured? 3.6 pounds? I don't know. Again, it gets into the question of what was it intended to do? An intimidation weapon? Yes. Execution weapon? Yeah, unfortunately it was used for that. Maybe it was a secondary war fighting tool. I don't know. But in the Ming Dynasty and other historical records we do see pictures of the Chinese Dadao in action, so we did know it fought, and it was used for probably thousands of years, at least interpretations of this blade design. You know, is it their first choice is my question that I personally have. I don't know. You know, if I went to war and I could only be, you know, using a sword, I would probably go with a katana over a Chinese war sword. It's faster. I won't fatigue as readily with a katana. It has reach, has penetration capabilities, has some sweep to it, so I can do shearing cuts, thrust cuts. I think the Chinese war sword is much more limited. It is a cleaving weapon. It is a hacking weapon only. Well, I shouldn't say only. It can do some penetration. in the hands of a skilled operator, which is our art of its own. I mean, there are guys that train with the type, with the Chinese Dadao. They're good with it. You can see demonstrations of guys using it, and you're like, holy crap, dude, stay away from that guy. But like anything, it's a lifetime pursuit, or at least one that you're going to put a lot of time and practice in. You too would get good at it if you did so. Look at how thick this thing is. And it tapers down towards the tip. It's a triangular cross section. Again, it's a cleaving weapon. Blood groove running right through here all the way along, giving more rigidity to the blade. Again, a perfect polished finish in the cold steel example. So look at this side. It's a gorgeous display piece. It really is. Be careful to where you display it, by the way. Don't let children get a hold of it and play with it. Idiots get a hold of it. Because someone could be swinging this around, goofing with it, and someone walks by them and off comes an arm. Safety tip from TMP. I'm saying it could happen. All these swords are that way. They are to be treated with responsibility, respect, and a sense of soberness. Look at the guard there. That's a weapon in its own right. You get close enough. There's no rattling at all in this cold steel example. I mean, it is tight. Again, this one's about 10 years old. I think that's a rayon wrapped handle, super tight. Again, I love the length of it. It's just, wow, you can like extend your hands and get even more reach and velocity out of the swing. It blows my mind. Handling this is completely different than reading about it. There's another weapon. Welded on steel pommel ring on the cold steel Chinese war sword. And by the way, this is an interpretation of the type, the Chinese Dadao. I think I'm saying that right, D-A-D-A-O. So it's probably a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier than the swords of the era. There's all types of different examples. Most were produced in a non-production line, so maybe in a certain village using available steels they had at the time, available handle materials, and it was kind of a village piece. That to me is more interesting. And there are some surviving examples. Again, I'm not the expert on the type. I did do some reading in preparation for this tabletop, and it was fascinating. Chinese Dadao. Here's a sheath, by the way, by Cold Steel, and it is beautiful. Look at this. 100% leather, stitched. This one is 10 years old. Brass snaps. This, by the way, says made in China. I'm kidding. I don't know what that says. Made in China. It surely is made in China. It has to be. It is lined leather, so it's double thickness of leather. Let's take a look at what it looks like in the sheath. And I'm going to give you yet another safety tip from experience. No, I've never cut myself, but I could see a problem. Any of these big swords, when they're in the sheath, if you turn them upside down, you can kind of see some wear and tear on my sheath here by putting it in. That's normal. Be careful the sword doesn't fall out. Even though this will clasp over the steel guard, it will kind of fall out a bit like that. At least it does secure it. But a katana, this gross messer by Cold Steel, will definitely fall out of the sheath. And if you try to grab it, look out. You're going to have a nasty cut. Another safety tip. Cool sheath though. But there's no way to attach to a belt. You know, it's meant to probably be slid in a tunic or a tunic belt of some sort. But it's a display piece. So for me, at least, I don't really care. And so I store it. Actually, I'll store it on the wall sometimes in a locked room, by the way. Double locked room. In case someone breaks in so they can't thieve it or access it as a weapon against us. Or if it's not in display, I'll just put it in the sheath and store it in the gun case like that. In the gun safe, I should say. Really nice looking sheath. There is a blackened version I saw. I think they call it the MAA Chinese War Sword. I think I'm getting that right. It's also by Cold Steel. And it's a great looking sword in its own right. I'll probably review this gross messer individually. Again, it's representative of those swords I saw in the Fitzwilliams Museum. It also has a really long handle. I really like swords that have that. Katanas, the gross messer, Chinese war sword, because I can't imagine swinging, a sword of this mass and length around one-handed. An example of that would be like the 1.5 hand sword, or some of those I saw in the museum. They just have very short handles and they have this huge blade on them. I asked myself, how did guys wield that in combat? I don't know. They're probably a lot stronger than I am. This is a cool sword though. Look at that crossguard, dude. A serious another weapon. And they were used as weapons when you got closer. If you're too close to get a thrust cut, just use a guard. Totally would work. So the Chinese war sword, the Chinese Dadao, interesting history. An intimidation weapon in the early 1900s. Mostly, maybe an execution weapon. I have to say that because that's historically accurate. That's the way they used it. But today for us, I think primarily a collectible. The Chinese war sword by Cold Steel. That's where its primary interest would lie. For me, it's all these swords. I never would say, oh, this is a primary weapon for me. No way. You aren't going to have it on your person if and when you needed it. I would not want to repel a home invasion with a sword and go to court and explain my actions in this day and age. Can you imagine how you would be portrayed? Even if you won, even if you were 110% justified. You know, hey, you know, you defeated a robber with a Chinese war sword and decapitated him. Ugh. No, forget about it. I'd much rather use a different system. We'll just say that, different system. If you want to know how to operate this, like that essay said, put down by Ben Judkins, go study Yin Yu Zhan's 1933 manual on how to operate a Chinese Dadao. He wrote the book on it. He said the ideal Dadao is 35 inches long. This is a little bit longer, 38 inches overall length, and 3.5 pounds. That's about what the weight is on the Chinese war sword. And I would imagine he knows exactly what he's talking about. But again, just like any of these blades, there are practitioners who know them, who master them. Each one is completely different in how it's employed, thrust cuts, the maneuvers you do with them. This one is probably the lightest on the table. Not probably, it is. The Shirakawa. Sick. Also a long double-handed handle. This one, by the way, is about $270 in Amazon. Catalog number 88CWS for Chinese war sword. Totally worth it. I mean, us guys, we just like cool things, right? Kind of like this Cold Steel Espada XL in electric blue and burnt bronze Cerakote that we did. It's a cool collectible. It's also a fighting blade. Modern interpretation of a Persian design. Very sick. Or the Smale Mudmaster watch. Also cool. Highly recommended, man. That is my review on the Cold Steel Chinese war sword. I didn't show you any cutting video because I'm not the expert. I mean, I didn't go out and cut water bottles, sticks, 2x4s, tatami mats. Now, there's plenty of that online. But I think you know that it is amazing in its cutting potential. That's what it's primarily designed for. Not a farming implement. This is to sever things, unfortunately. That's what it's for. Check out Cold Steel's demo video and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Nutnfancy.